My 8 high upside players going into week 1 of the fantasy football playoffs. If you got here, congratulations. If you didn't, we still love you and good luck going into next year. There's plenty of leagues I did not make, so keep that in mind. Plenty of leagues I did make. But my 8 high upside players going into week 15 that I truly feel confident in that you should be starting. So let's get straight into it. My first high upside player going into week 15 that I really trust going into this week that you should be starting with some confidence is Rashee Rice, aka Richie Rich, I call him. The last 3 weeks have been phenomenal, and what we've been waiting for Rashee Rice all season long. Week 12 caught 8 out of 10 in a touchdown, over 24 fantasy points. Week 13 caught 8 out of 9, over 14 fantasy points. Week 14, one of his second biggest game so far this year, caught 7 out of 10 targets and a touchdown, over 18 fantasy points. Now he's playing the New England Patriots, who have been struggling all offseason, who's currently already eliminated, for the playoff contention, who's probably going to have a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. And this defense has been struggling, and so has this offense. This is a get-right game for the Kansas City Chiefs, who just lost 2 in a row. I repeat, they lost 2 in a row, and correct me if I'm wrong, I am not sure that has ever happened for Patrick Mahomes in his career. Comment down below. I could be wrong. Maybe I should ask Zach because he's a Chiefs fan. That's a little bit of a burn. Sorry, brother. But Rashee Rice, a top wide receiver, in my personal opinion, he can easily come in and step in as a wide receiver 2 or a great flex option in a must-win week going into week 15. My second high upside player coming into this week, another oldie but goodie, DeAndre Hopkins, baby. He is going against the Houston Texans, a divisional matchup. If I'm not mistaken, they are playing at home as well. Currently, the Houston Texans do give up the top 6, most fantasy points to the wide receiver position when you adjust for schedule here. And look, he has been seeing 2 great games, especially with Will Levis. Week 13, caught 5 out of 12 and a touchdown. And against Miami, that crazy comeback, 7 out of 12 and a touchdown. Both over 18 fantasy points in week 13, over 25 in week 14. Now he's going against the Houston Texans. And look, a lot of this has to do with if CJ Stroud is going to play. Because if CJ Stroud does not play, this team, the Tennessee Titans, could see multiple opportunities to score. Time of possession is key when you think of game scripts, especially going into week 15 of the fantasy football season, the week 1 of the playoffs, right? DeAndre Hopkins has seen 2 great weeks where he has scored touchdowns, and I truly believe that could continue as he goes against the Houston Texans if CJ Stroud doesn't play. So I will be starting DeAndre Hopkins with some confidence. My third high upside player, wide receiver, coming into this week is Courtland Sutton versus the Detroit Lions. The Lions currently give up the 7th most points to the wide receiver position. They're playing in a dome with weather does not matter. And Courtland Sutton is currently tied with second behind Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans for touchdowns amongst wide receivers. He has scored a touchdown in essentially every single game besides 3. That is absolutely wild to me. He's guaranteed safe floor. If you need a good 12 to 15 plus points, Courtland Sutton is going to get that for you unless he doesn't score a touchdown. The 2 games, if I'm not mistaken, that he had less than double-digit points, he didn't score a touchdown. Week 12 against Cleveland, by the way, a top defense. And week 5 against the Jets, by the way, another top defense. Keep that in mind. The Detroit Lions, once again, currently give up the 7th most points, or 6th most points, 7th most points to the wide receiver position. Courtland Sutton is a great high upside play going into this week. My 4th wide receiver going into this week that you should be starting with some confidence and has some high upside play is Romeo Doubs here. And he's going against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they give up the 2nd most points to the wide receiver position. If you're struggling with injuries, if you are questioning whether you should start this person or that person, Romeo Doubs does have a fantastic bounce back game because this Tampa Bay secondary is abysmal currently right now, just like the Philadelphia Eagles, who currently give up the 1st most points to the wide receiver position. They saw that kind of loss that they had to the New York Giants there, and they need a bounce back game, a game that they must win here if they want to play, keep their playoff contentions alive here. And Jordan Love did struggle last week. They go and play at home versus Tampa Bay, which could be a massive game. And Christian Watson is trending downwards of not playing. And also Jaden Reed is also questionable with some injuries. So both those guys somehow miss some time, or just Christian Watson. Romeo Doubs does have the opportunity, who has been a decent floor, 11 fantasy points, 16 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points. We've seen those single digits in a 6 and a 7, but he does get the targets. Last week he saw 7 targets against the Giants, against a decent secondary and Deonte Banks. Now against Tampa Bay, once again, who currently give up the 7th most points to the wide receiver position. All right, and my last wide receiver on this list, I would say the riskiest of this list so far when it comes down to the wide receiver position, especially on a playoff week. But if you're going based off of this matchup, it is one of the best matchups for a wide receiver, and that is Jackson Smith and Jigba. Now, I know the biggest question mark here is Drew Lock going to play, or is it Geno Smith? I don't think there's a massive difference when you think of the fantasy output that Jackson Smith and Jigba could potentially be putting up when it does come down to the Philadelphia Eagles. Currently, the Philadelphia Eagles give up an average of 43.1 fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. That is the most in the NFL when you think of schedule adjusted per game here. And Jackson Smith and Jigba, who has been seeing more and more opportunities as of late. We saw that game against Dallas, who is a pretty good secondary, caught 7 out of 11 over 13 fantasy points and had a touchdown call back. Against San Francisco, caught 4 out of 7, 6 fantasy points. But that's the type of opportunities I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody that's going to be getting at least 7 targets per game and giving me that opportunity to try and win. So if you do start Jackson Smith and Jigba, definitely depends on who you should be starting over him. But if you need a wide receiver, maybe in a 14, a 16-man league, this could be a perfect opportunity for you to start Jackson Smith and Jigba going into Week 15. All right, and my 6th player coming into this week at the quarterback position, this is one of the best streaming quarterbacks of this week. If you need a quarterback, and maybe your quarterback is going against a good defense, Russell Wilson, Mr. Unlimited. If you do need a quarterback, and if he is available in your waiver wire somehow, I will pick him up and potentially start him going into this week. The Detroit Lions, who he is playing, currently gives up the 2nd most points to the wide receiver position. They give up the 6th most points, they give up the 2nd most points to the quarterback position, and they also give up the 6th most points to the wide receiver position. So this is a recipe for success, right? And he has been averaging pretty decent fantasy points these last couple of games. 20 fantasy points, week 14, 20 fantasy points, 17, 16, 22. He has a safe floor and some decent rushing upside. If you do need a quarterback here, you have Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, right? Javonte Williams. This should be a high-scoring game because the opposing team does know how to score, and that's exactly what you want when you come into a matchup. You want some high upside, a high over-under, where your team and your fantasy players could give you some high fantasy points when you think of going back and forth in a shootout. Russell Wilson is somebody I'm willing to pick up and start going into Week 15. All right, my 2nd quarterback and my second to last, I do have one more player that you should be starting, which is a defensive player, so stay tuned for that one. My 2nd quarterback here is Jordan Love against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What did I say earlier about someone like a Romeo Doubs? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers currently give up the 2nd most points to the wide receiver position, and they also give up the 3rd most points to the quarterback position. Jordan Love has been on a hot streak in the past couple weeks outside of Week 14 against my beloved Giants, where he just wasn't hitting the right way, right? 29 fantasy points in Week 13 against KC, 32 against Detroit, 22 against the Chargers, 22 against Pittsburgh. He should have a significantly better game going against Tampa Bay at home at Lombardi Field. This should be a good bounce back game for Jordan Love, where this is a must win. He does have some injured running backs as well, which means this could result in a more of a pass heavy game when you think of this game streak with AJ Dillon in question starting, and same thing with Aaron Jones. So Jordan Love is my second, or technically my seventh high upside player going into this week. All right, and last but not least, if you do need a streamer defense, maybe they're still available on your waiver wires, the Atlanta Falcons is someone that I'm willing to pick up and start as they're going against the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers currently give up the second most points to opposing defenses when you start him. They're currently averaging 12.9 fantasy points to the opposing team, and we've all seen this struggle. Breece Hall continues to get sacked. The offensive line is terrible. They cannot move the ball down the field. A lot of mental mistakes, a lot of special team mistakes, a lot of drop balls, tip passes, sacks. This is what you want in a turnover-worthy type of game, especially in Week 15, Week 1 of the fantasy playoffs for your defense here. There's a lot of opportunity when you think of these guys. So those are the people that I'm willing to start. Once again, Rashee Rice, DeAndre Hopkins, Russell Wilson, Cortland Sutton, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Romeo Doubs, Jordan Love, and the Atlanta Falcons defense. Guys, we appreciate each and every one of you. I really, really wish you the best of luck going into Week 15, Week 1 of the fantasy playoffs. And as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.